Well, it's been over a week since the Reserve Bank dropped the official cash rate by 0.5% to 2.5%. However, while some of the big banks did respond by cutting their 6-month rates, none have yet passed on a cut to the variable or floating rates. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz. Good morning, Bernard.
Good morning.
Why haven't they? I mean, they got a good cut.
Yes, it's an ominous silence, really, since the rate cut from the Reserve Bank. None of them have cut their variable rate mortgages. And if you've got a floating rate, you'd think, well, wasn't this the whole point? When the official cash rate was cut, I was going to get a cut in my variable rate. But the bank's profit margins on interest lending have been squeezed in the last year and a half or so. And the main reason for that is their $100 billion of foreign funding, which has seen its price effectively increase because of the credit crunch. And now the banks have really hit rock bottom. They can't pass that on, they believe, into their floating rates. And I think we've really seen the bottom of actual mortgage rates for most people, certainly for mortgage rates. And this means that the Reserve Bank really is pushing on a string by cutting the official cash rate anymore.
So the bottom is essentially the 6-month rate because they're picking more cuts to come in the OCR, and that'll be it.
Yes, we're down to about 5.4%, the best rate you can really get for 6 months. And I'd be surprised, even if we see more cuts in the official cash rate, that would drop too much lower. Really, interest rates around 5–6%. That is the bottom of the range. And pretty good when you look at the history of New Zealand mortgage rates. We tend to average around about 8%. So at the moment, we're well below the average.
Is the Reserve Bank going to accept that, though? I mean, the 4 big Australian banks have all reported pretty solid profit results in the last couple of weeks.
Yes, but when you actually dig down through those profit results, I did this a few weeks ago, you find that their net interest margins have actually been squeezed. They're making their money in other ways, by fees in some cases, by trading income, and also by reducing their costs quite substantially. And so that's where they're making their money, not so much in the old idea of gouging customers by not cutting deposit rates and leaving mortgage rates high. So the Reserve Bank may try to push the banks harder, but they can't really mount an argument to say the banks are profit gouging, because I don't think they are.
What about business lending? That's the other big complaint. Any hope of movement there?
Well, this is even tougher for the banks because the risks in business lending are much more than for mortgage lending. One of the great ironies of the last 3 or 4 months is that some of the biggest growth in lending that we're seeing from the banks is into the mortgage sector, exactly the area that perhaps the Reserve Bank doesn't want in the long term. So the banks are under pressure because they're seeing quite big rises in their bad debts, particularly to some small to medium businesses, so they're being much tougher there. Although you'd have to say there has to be some cases for the banks to pass on rate cuts to businesses who really need it. And for their own sake, the banks need to protect their own customers through the recession.
If Dr Boland has now said he'll keep rates low for another, almost 18 months, the only option left to him is to do what the Europeans in the UK and the US are doing, and that's print money, isn't it?
Yes, and I sort of shudder when I think about it. The idea of printing money is anathema to a bank that's supposedly focused on inflation. New Zealand still has a domestic inflation problem. Have a really good look at those inflation numbers. Sure, we're doing better because the currency is lower, but we've still got inflation going through this economy at local levels, which are relatively high. I know the overall number's going to be in or even below the target range, but the Reserve Bank, I don't think, can credibly argue in favour of printing money, quantitative easing, and I think it's going to be discredited in the long run overseas.
QV figures out today showing some sort of stabilisation potentially in the housing market. Is this being brought on by the low interest rates, do you think?
Yes, when you've got interest rates at 6% and you don't take into account they're likely to rise over the lifetime, it's very easy to say, boy, 6% forever, I can afford a house with that. And a lot of people are looking at getting into the housing market, first home buyers and some rental property investors. They think that house prices have fallen as far as they're going to. I think that's a bit premature. I think we've got a long way to go yet with this recession, certainly through 2009 into 2010. We're going to see unemployment rising towards the end of 2010 still, and that is going to put a cap on any gains in house prices. And those people who think they're in for capital gains, back to the sort of levels we saw in 2005, 6, 7, are wrong.
Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz, thank you very much.